Hi guys. So, sorry, technical hitches as always. So, it's the weekend, so we're here for our nutrition type silliness as usual. So, I'm just trying to get my Facebook to come up on my phone and it's not coming up. So, I can't see whether any of you are here yet. I'm just going to wait and see whether it's coming up. I'm going to get my scissors. Be there in a minute. Nope, still no longer from there. So why is it not coming up? Oh, inquiring minds would like to know, like, why are you not coming up? Okay, let's do this the old-fashioned way. Let's go on my 4G and see whether that works, because my internet isn't always the greatest. Oh, look, there we are. It's a miracle. As soon as I go onto 4G, all of a sudden it's working. So I think my son is hogging all the internet with his PlayStation. So I'm just going to see if I can fire it back up again and see what we've got. So I've got Robert and Biber, the baby, on there. Let's see if I can find something to put my phone against. Let's see if we get any joy in regards to internet, etc. Okay, so today, like I said, we're going to be hitting the nutrition side of things. So, today I'm going to talk about macros and how we work out our calories and our macros so that we can hit the right amount of food. A lot of people have been saying that they are struggling with understanding how many calories they're supposed to be eating, etc., etc. And it's not always easy to establish what we should be at. A lot of the time it's a trial and error type affair. Oh, I know what the problem might be. Let's have a look and see if it's hold on. Can you hear me now? I'm going to turn my phone off onto 4G because this is horrendous. My internet is horrendous at the moment. So, let's see whether that helps. So yes, how to work out exactly how much we're supposed to be eating is not always an exact science. A lot of cases it's trial and error a lot of the time. So when we look at food labels and foodstuffs, hi Jan, hey Jodie, quite often they'll come in and they'll have so many portions allocated to it, etc., etc., and they're mostly based off the government guidelines for calorific intake per person. So as we know, they set it at about, I think it's 2,500 for men and 2,000 for women. Well, that's fine as a kind of average, but unfortunately none of us are average. We're all atypical, if you like. So we're not all going to be able to work off of that average sort of quantities, etc. So if they're working off the average person eating, say, 2,000 calories per day, you may need more or less depending on your outputs, your physical needs, your weight, your age, your gender, how much you do, So how do we work out how many calories we actually do need? Well, there's a couple of ways. The way I generally work off is our BMR, our basic or basal metabolic rate. So this is the kind of everyday living calories you need without actually moving around. It's your basic needs per day. And then on top of that, you will add on your physical activity and any neat stuff that you're doing, so any of your general movement. So how do we work out our BMR? Well, there is a formula. We all have a formula, don't we? The basal metabolic rate, which I clearly can't say, is normally around about 60 to 70% of your calorific needs per day, and obviously that varies depending on how active you are as well. And obviously men typically need more than women, which is so unfair, which is why men tend to lose weight by just cutting out their daily Mars bar, and us poor women have to do 3 hours cardio, eat dust, and just basically live miserably for the rest of our lives. No, it's not quite true, but it feels like that sometimes, doesn't it? So, yes, going back to our BMR, there is a formula that you can use, and the one that's generally used by most people is the Benedict formula, which I'm trying to remember what it is off the top of my head, and I can't. I think it's, for men, it's 66 plus 6.5 times the body weight in pounds. Then it's times 12 times your body height. I can't remember. Anyway, you don't need to know it because there are loads of places where you can go online and find out what your BMR is. So what you basically do is you go onto Google and you type in BMR calculator. Now, there are a couple of BMR calculators that are on the internet, and they all kind of serve a pretty good purpose for what you need. But there are some are obviously better than others. Some would take into account lots of other things as well. And we'll get onto that in a minute. But what we want to do is go from the BMR to how we work out our macros. So now people are going to say to me, what on earth are macros? I know a lot of you out there know what macros are, but for the average person who doesn't spend their life in the gym, macros can be a bit of a weird term that we don't kind of necessarily use every day. So I'm just going to pop a little thingy up here because it's cool and I can. So this here is basically a little visual of how your macros would be represented via food. So we have your carbohydrates, and we have your proteins, and we have your fats. So what people often ask, and some crossover. Obviously, there's foods that contain proteins, there's foods that contain carbohydrates, there's food that contains fats, and the majority of foods will contain all three, but tend to be separated out by what they hold in the majority. So if you're looking at maybe carbohydrates, you would look at things like sugars. Refined carbs come into the carbohydrate would be things like cereal, breads, that sort of thing. You've also got potatoes in there, pasta in there. It's basically anything that is heavy on the carbohydrate content would fall, or foods that are heavy in the carbohydrate content would fall into your carb macros. And then you have your proteins, obviously your fish, your meats. Cheese contains protein, so that can cross over with fats and proteins, etc. There's a lot of sort of nuts and stuff like that have proteins. And the problem is, at this day and age, is that people have kind of got a bit excited about protein, and now everything that's got protein in it is considered to be mega healthy. And the thing is that nothing is exclusively healthy, nothing is exclusively bad. It depends on your timing generally and how much of it you are actually eating as to whether or not it's going to be good or bad for you. So, if you eat fruit exclusively, it's going to be bad for you because it's basically carbohydrates and fibre, water, and that's pretty much your fruits in the general scheme of things. So you would be missing out on proteins and fats which your body needs to operate. So anything that you eat exclusively without sort of any thought of providing your body with the other macronutrients, you're going to end up struggling. So that's basically your macronutrients in a nutshell. So your macronutrients are things that your body needs in large amounts, relatively. So because then you have your micronutrients, which is things like your vitamins, your minerals. They're all your micronutrients, which your body needs in much, much smaller amounts. And your body needs all of this in order to work properly. And it needs a variety of nutrients for your energy and your digestive system to work. The best way to keep tabs on that is obviously to track what you're eating. Not just to lose weight, but obviously to stay actually healthy. So people have found over the years that there's various ways of tracking our intake. Calories has been the big one for many, many years, but obviously the old saying that all calories aren't equal is actually true. In the basic energy form, they are, but when it comes down to keeping the body healthy, they're not. So people kind of get lost in the whole calorie thing and forget about what we're actually supposed to be eating for optimal health. And the same thing goes for the macros, because over the years I've found, and this is through both diets that I've done with my clients and myself, is it's very easy to neglect stuff. So I'm just saying hi to everyone. Hi Georgie, hey Gemma, hey Ricky, hey Matthew, hey Claire, hey Chris, hey Emily. So it's very easy to neglect what the body needs when we start to really focus on things like calories or macronutrients. So what we're trying to do is I'm trying to explain to you how the macronutrients work and how we can track in order to benefit ourselves in regards to energy intake. But having said that, just obsessing over macros is going to lead you down a dark path eventually, same as obsessing over calories. So I'm going to explain quickly what each macronutrient does for the body. So we're going to move on to carbohydrates because this is the one that's been vilified over the years, along with sugar, etc. It's been given a bad name, and actually, it isn't intrinsically bad. Carbohydrates, your body needs carbohydrates, and your carbohydrates are muscle sparing. So when people think about going keto, etc., and they go, oh yeah, I lose all this body, I look amazing. If you don't have carbohydrates in your diet, you're on the back foot already when it comes to being, keeping your lean tissue. So carbohydrates are like, if you equate it to maybe a car, carbohydrates are like your petrol or your diesel. They're your quick energy. And when your body eats carbs, it turns them into glucose or glycogen, or a form of sugar, if you like, that is stored by the body for later use. So it can be used very quickly as a source of fuel during exercise or energy between meals. And your carbohydrates are contained in starchy vegetables, whole grains, anything, potatoes, all that sort of thing. And they generally are normally reasonably good in regards to dietary fibre as well, unless they're refined. So when things are refined, it means they've gone through a process and they've had the fibre removed. So that's basically carbohydrates in a nutshell. That was my son in the background, by the way. I've got a belly down here as well. So we're now going to move on to protein, and protein's like now the god of all nutrition right now. And protein is your chassis in the car. It's your building blocks. It's what keeps you going. It's your muscle. It helps you grow. It helps repair injuries. And proteins are made of amino acids, essentially, of which your body needs 20 different kinds. They're the building blocks of the body. 9 of those will be essential amino acids, meaning your body cannot produce them on its own, and you must obtain them from food. Now, I'm going to touch on a delicate subject here because this is going to get a lot of people's backs up, especially, I apologise in advance, but especially vegans, because as soon as you mention protein, vegans and vegetarians to some extent do tend to go up in flames. And this is not meant as a derogatory comment at all. This is meant as an educational comment. How many of you know what plant-based foods contain your essential amino acids? Because I'm pretty much guessing there's not many of you out there that do. Hey Shane, hey Eugene, hey Jamie, hey Emma. So, how many of you, in all honesty, could name 9 separate foods containing your essential amino acids? I'm pretty much guessing there's very few of you that can, and this is where the problem comes in, is because a lot of you, because you don't realise about this particular situation of your body not being able to produce these essential amino acids, can end up neglecting what your body needs, just not through deliberate neglect, but just through lack of knowledge. And this is something that probably some of you probably could do with going away and researching, because your body needs those 9 essential amino acids and it cannot produce them on its own. So the only way you're going to get those is through your diet. And we'll touch on all that in much, much greater detail tomorrow, on my next chat tomorrow. This is a very basic overview. So, high protein foods, obviously meat, fish, so poultry, soy, yogurt, cheese, other dairy products that you might find. If you're on a plant-based diet, it will be some starches, vegetables and beans mostly are quite good source of proteins. So yeah, the pulses, etc. That's where you'll find your proteins if you're on a plant-based diet. So, then moving on to fats, which is our third macronutrient. Dietary fat went through the same sort of thing that carbohydrates is going through now. It's vilified as, that was the reason everyone was fat. It was nothing to do with the fact that no one had any self-control after, years of deprivation through the war, etc., etc., and then suddenly started eating more food. Dietary fat is essential to our body. There are certain vitamins that you cannot take in without fats. So, and those are what we call fat-soluble vitamins. So you would need, hang on, I've lost my connection, sorry. I know, look at me with whizzy visuals. So I'm going to remove that actually. I can leave it there actually. No, you can have that there because it's pretty. We'll have it there. We'll have it there. Korean! So yeah, fats. Moving on to fats. Got distracted. Okay, so dietary fat is required for our body to absorb certain vitamins. A, D, E and K are the vitamins that you need to be absorbed through your dietary fat. So without dietary fat, you won't be able to take those essential vitamins in. And as we've brushed on those before, they are actually some of the vitamins that are really essential to help with our immune system. So obviously, if you don't take in a certain amount of dietary fat, those vitamins aren't going in and our immune system will be compromised. So yes, we do need dietary fat. So all of those of you that have been on fat-free diets in the past, stop. Because it's not just vitamins as well, it's the dietary fats serves other purposes. I can't seem to talk today. It protects your organs, protects you against the cold. Has anyone noticed that when you have a meal with fats in it, you do feel warm afterwards? So it also supports your cell growth and helps with hormone production as well. So moving on now. So we've had on macronutrients. I've waffled on enough about that. Probably your eyes are glazed over and everything. So what calories does each macronutrient have? Well, carbohydrates. Now we're talking pure carbohydrates. Now we're not talking about, weight as in like a weight of a piece of food. We're talking about weight as in the carbohydrate content of that food. So carbohydrates have 4 calories per gram, as do proteins. Fats, however, have slightly higher, almost double actually, 9 calories per gram. So obviously that's why we have a lot less fat in our diet than we do carbohydrates and proteins. So from that point, if you're working to the government guideline of 2,000 calories, it's fairly easy to work out your split. Yeah, so fats are almost half of what you should have, carbohydrate and proteins wise. So you go 40, 40, 20. Yeah, easy peasy. 40, 40, 20. That's our macro split, and actually, that quite often is people's macro split for that very reason. Hey, Kevin. Um, it's not always ideal because unless you're kind of taking into account your lifestyle and what you're doing all the time, you might need more carbohydrates, you might need less, you might need more fats, you might need less. If you're carb sensitive, you need less carbs. Some people are actually fat sensitive, you might need less fats. But that does give you somewhere to start, in all fairness. So it does bring us to the kind of question, how many macros should I eat, or what should my macro split be? And this is what I'm saying. There is really no answer to this question because everyone is such an individual. So if you work to the 40, 40, 20, that would work. You could work 45 to 60% carbohydrates and maybe 20 to 35% fats, and then the remainder to protein. And that's another recommendation that I think it's the American dietary people recommend, something like that. Anyway, so there's lots of different splits that you can do, and actually this is where the fun starts, because you can really start playing around with your diet and finding what suits you in regards to your macro split. So what would I do if I had someone who was a bodybuilder like myself, and then somebody who was maybe a triathlete? How would I work out their macro split? Well, the first thing I would consider is their output, so training hours, etc., etc. So we go back to our BMR, we get our basic basal metabolic rate established, then we'd work out their training output, and then I would be looking at giving them predominantly a higher carbohydrate diet because they are endurance athletes, and endurance athletes need a lot of carbohydrate in their diet. To preserve any lean tissue that they've got. Their output is huge. So in comparison to maybe somebody who wasn't doing quite so much, they would have much higher carbohydrate content in their diet. So that would be an example, as opposed to a bodybuilder, although their carbohydrates wouldn't be that excessively low, they would be lower than somebody who was doing endurance sports. So this is a sort of example as to how I would cater for an athlete. If it was somebody who was sedentary, somebody who was working in an office, I would predominantly strip their carbohydrates out all the time they're sat at their computer, etc., because they're not doing an awful lot. They don't need carbohydrates at that point. They would be stored as fat because they're not being utilised. And then I would just probably pop in some carbohydrates around their more active times in the day. So maybe if they went to the gym after they worked, etc., that's when I'd be popping in the carbohydrates. And again, this is where the trial and error comes in, because there is no right or wrong aspect to what you're doing. A lot of it is trial and error, and a lot of it is down to experience as well. I mean, I've been doing this a long time now, so I can normally throw the ball somewhere within the ballpark and not be too far off what they need in regards to fats, calories, proteins and carbs. So now we have our calories and our macros. And we've established we're going to have to try and establish our ideal ratio. There are apps out there that can help you with that. Again, I found them a bit trial and error, but there's a few. So I'm just going to pop those up there and let you know about these. So hang on, let me just move that. So there's a website. This is one of them. Let me just increase the size on that one. So this one, there's only 2 or 3 that I've ever really kind of used in the years that I've been doing this. There's one called ifitfitsyourmacros.com. It's not a bad one. I think it's free still. I'm not sure, but I think it's free still. It's pretty comprehensive, this one. I mean, it's free. I'm sure it is free, this one. I think this one you need to actually register, but it is free. and they will they give you quite a good comprehensive um, calculator to establish what your macros should be. It doesn't take into account how active you are at work and stuff like that, though, or whether you have hedonistic foods that you really struggle with, or any cravings or medical conditions. That's the only criticism I've got of this one. But it does take into account other daily routines and important factors, so things like training, etc. So it's not as comprehensive as some of them, but it's not bad. So I'm just going to drop that one down. And then the next one is from a company called A Healthy Eater, and I came across this not too long ago. Actually, I was messing around looking for stuff. This one is actually free. And it does base your macronutrients on your age, height, and gender as well. So you get kind of a little bit more accuracy than with the last one, with if it fits your macros. And it will establish whether or not you want to lose weight or gain body fat and stuff like that. Because most people, when they think of these things, they just think of it in terms of losing fat. But actually, sometimes it's the other end of the spectrum, and I have been at this end of the spectrum where you actually want to put a bit of weight on. And people go, "Oh, you're so lucky." It's not actually the case. If you're somebody who doesn't put weight on very quickly, it can be a struggle. So having a little bit of help in that regard does come in handy. Hey Jill, hey Robert, hey Rebecca, hey Ross, hey Michael, hey Biddy. So I'm going to drop that one down. So the third one I've got one, and this company, I'm trying to remember what they used to be called. I'm sure it was Muscle something. Anyway, it's these guys, Legion Athletics. This one is probably the most comprehensive one that I've come across that's free. It's not really like it's on their website. It's not like a specific app as such. You have to go on their website, but it will calculate everything that you need. It's really quite detailed. It takes into account your weight, height, body fat percentage if you know it, your activity level. There's just loads of stuff that it kind of will take into account. The only downside to this is obviously you do have to know those particular details. So those are three macro calculators that you can use to help you work out your macro split. So if you're kind of not really wanting to do the whole trial and error thing, you want to actually have something to base from, that's a good way to start. So once we've established our macro split, what do we do with that? It's like, I know now I am going to sit at, for argument's sake, 40, 30, 30. So 40 protein, 30 carbohydrates, 30 fats. I've just pulled that off my head. I wouldn't do that for myself personally. But so we're now sitting there going, right, okay, so I've just got this figure. What do I do with it? I don't really know what to do with it. You need to track your macros. And the only way you're going to do that is actually record everything that you put in your mouth. And I mean everything. I'm not just talking about food. I'm talking about drink, anything that will contain calories. So, because really, the macro numbers aren't particularly helpful if you don't actually use them. So, how do we track our macros? Well, you can do it the real hard way, and you can write down everything you eat, and then you can go on the internet and you can find out the calorific value of everything independently and make it really hard for yourself. Or you can use a macro tracker. And there's three that I've used in the past. The first one is one that I use personally all the time. I've just found it really easy to use. I'm not promoting it. I don't have any kind of affiliation with any of these guys, so please don't think that this is the reason why I'm telling you about these. I don't have any kind of affiliation. So the first one I use is this one, and you're probably familiar with this. You've probably heard about this one, all of you. It's not a great picture actually. It's not the best choice. This is MyFitnessPal. Now the reason why I say that this is a really good app is because for the last few years it's been supported by Under Armour, and they put quite a lot of investment into this particular app, and you can use it on your smartwatch. You can use it on your phone, you can use it on your laptop. Some heart rate monitors now use it as well in conjunction with their own software. Hey Luke, hey Bonnie, hey Sherry, hey Matt, hey John. So it's actually a really neat little app. You can use it. You can use the free app, or you can pay for it. I have a monthly subscription. I'm trying to remember how much it is. I think it's about £7. Um, I'll have to double check. £7.99, something like that. The difference between the free and the paid for app is you get a lot more with the paid, obviously. With the free one, you can only do it by percentages. Your macros you can only do it by percentages, so it'll be like 50%, 20%, 10%, etc., etc. Whereas on the paid app, you can switch it over to grams, which I mean, I tend to work in weights. I weigh my food, so I know exactly what I'm eating. It's really hard to estimate what you're. It's alright, Benny's just farted, and then he's just looked at me and walked away. No, it wasn't me, buddy. It was you. So yeah, so you can choose to pay for this and just get a little bit more bang for your buck, or just use the free app. The free app is great anyway. You've got an option of barcode scanning. So if your food item has a barcode on it, you just scan it, and it will register on there automatically. Whatever it is that you've got, and you can do it by grams or calories. I think grams or calories. So anyway, that's MyFitnessPal. I love MyFitnessPal. I've been using it for years. I've tried several different fitness trackers, and that's the one that macro trackers, and that is the one that I've got on with most. This is another one that I've used. It's very similar to MyFitnessPal. It's just not as user friendly, I don't think. This one is My Macros Plus. Again, not the greatest picture in the world. I just popped these off. I just screenshotted these earlier, but I didn't really do a very good job of it. And again, as you can see, it uses the same sort of format. It does your splits and your macros and bar charts, etc. It's got a good food database, but I would actually say to you, be really careful with the food databases. There's normally more than one entry for some of the foods because people can update them themselves. There tends to be more than one entry. So you do get some kind of really quite varied amounts. So if you really want to be kind of quite anal about this, you're probably best to enter your own amounts in there and do it manually rather than relying on the custom foods thing. The other thing as well, I forgot to mention this with MyFitnessPal. Both of these particular apps you can actually add recipes to. So if you add the amounts of food that you're using in a recipe, and then portion it out, it will actually give you the calorific amount of the meal rather than the individual ingredients, which is quite helpful. The bonus that this one has that it has over MyFitnessPal is you can actually use this one offline. You don't have to be online in order to use it, which is quite handy if you're not able to get an internet connection or anything like that. So I'm just going to drop that down. And then the last one, this one I don't have a great deal of familiarity with. I've only used it a couple of times and I didn't really get on with the interface on it at all. It's a little bit confusing for me, but it's got a really detailed dashboard and lots of like different reports. I think it's actually a little bit overkill, to be honest. There is a free version available. And that might be why I didn't get on with it too well, because generally the free versions aren't particularly user-friendly for obvious reasons. So you can pay for it, and I don't think it's particularly expensive. I think it's like a couple of quid to download, and then like £4 or £5 a month to run. So it's an equivalent of MyFitnessPal. It does track vitamins and minerals in addition to your macros, but then so does MyFitnessPal, and so does My Macros Plus, so it's not overly different in that regard. So that's some of the apps that you can actually use to help you track your macros. So that's pretty much macros in a nutshell. It's not overly complicated, but it can come across as really complicated. So to go over what I've just kind of waffled on about for the last half hour, if you want to track your macros or your calories, First, you need to know what your basal metabolic rate is. So go online, find out what your basal metabolic rate is. It will work you to the formula. You don't have to work it out yourself. You can do it yourself if you want to be wasting half an hour and scratching your head and probably still wondering whether or not you got the right answer. Go on, get your BMR, write that down, and then you need to work out what your activity levels are, etc., and work out what your energy expenditure is, and put that on top of your BMR. And then you'll have your daily calorific amount, and then that's when you need to work out, using one of your macro calculators, what you think your macros should be, and that's where you start. And then using a macro tracker, check what you're eating. And I think a lot of you will be surprised actually how far out you are with a lot of your macros, and how hard it is actually to eat a balanced diet if you're not used to doing that. So, but it will become habit very, very quickly if you do it all the time. So once you've done that, obviously you need to keep it going. So if you fancy giving it a go, I would recommend like a minimum of 4 weeks, and just see how you get on. When you first start doing it, it's an absolute ball ache because you're like, oh, you're constantly like blah 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 blah. Because most people eat without actually realizing what they're eating. They don't even register that they're eating half the time. A lot of people, when they first come to me and I say to them like, "What have you eaten today?" They'll go, um, and they'll sit there and they'll be trying to figure out what they've eaten because they can't actually remember. If someone says to me, "What have you eaten today?" I can literally, I know it's a bit different because my diet is tracked literally all the time. And I'm not saying it's perfect all the time, because it's not, because I do eat chocolate and I do eat foods that aren't necessarily optimal. Um, but I will always know what I've eaten, literally down to pretty much the last gram. So I do weigh my food. And that's something I recommend you all do actually initially when you first start doing this, is start weighing your food, because I think you will all be quite surprised at what 100 grams of chicken looks like, and what 100 grams of potato looks like, 100 grams of rice looks like. You know, it sounds like quite a lot, but actually when you put it on your plate, it really isn't. And just as an interest, you know, when you see on on the cereal packets, and it says like, I don't know, 125 grams per serving, Kellogg's Special K, and then you look on the packet and it goes 30 grams is a serving. Put 30 grams of cereal in your bowl, and you tell me whether that is worth actually eating, because quite frankly, that's not enough to feed a starving child. So yeah, it's not a serving in my mind. If it's going to be a serving, it needs to be something that will keep a grown adult satisfied for a couple of hours. And let's be honest, 30 grams serving of Special K is not going to keep a grown adult satisfied for more than 20 seconds. So, having gone over that, I'm actually almost going to kind of backtrack completely and just say, do I actually need to track my macros? I don't really know. In all honesty, it can be a bit much for a lot of people, and I don't work to macros. I never have done. I'll say that that's not true. I have worked to macros in the past, but I haven't done for many years. Like I've said before, I weigh my foods, and I kind of probably do track my macros, and I don't. I don't track them officially, but I kind of have a good enough knowledge about food that I kind of know what I'm eating generally in regards to my macro split anyway, just through experience. So I tend to weigh my food because I just find it a much more reliable way of eating. I know exactly how many calories are in 100 grams of chicken. I know exactly how many calories are in 100 grams of potato. Um, so I don't generally need to kind of worry too much about tracking macros specifically, but um, it is a really good way to educate yourself about food, but it's not an essential way to educate yourself about food. There's an old kind of fashioned way of doing it which kind of works, is a palm size, your own palm, not somebody else's palm, but a palm size of food in regards to an inch thick, in regards to whatever portion of whatever it is you're eating. So, you know, if your split is going to be so obviously you're going to have like half the amount of fats, because that's half So you'd have a palm of carbohydrate, palm of protein, and half a palm of fats, and that would be your kind of macro split. So you could do it like that. That's not a particularly accurate way of doing it, but it would still keep you moving forwards in regards to controlling your food. So you don't need to track your macros to be healthy, and you don't need to track your macros to build muscle or lose weight or reach any other health goal. In all honesty, I mean, this macro tracking is a relatively new thing. It was calories before that, so it's not really an essential form of tracking. But having said that, it's quite a reliable form of tracking, and it's quite flexible as well. So if you're one of these people that just literally cannot live without certain things, you can shift them into your diet using the macro tracking. But this is also brings me on to the other reason why I'm not a big fan of macro tracking, especially for dieting purposes, because if I give you a macro split and you are desperate for chocolate, people sort of save their macros to eat hedonistic foods, uh, and neglect actually eating healthily. And this is where macros fall on their ass, because it's really easy to do that. You can save macros, and you can end up eating really random shit just to make up your macros. Like you get to the end of the day and you find out that you've got 30 grams of fat and 20 grams of carbohydrates and 40 grams of protein left, and you end up eating some really, really weird random meal that's not necessarily particularly healthy, but because it fits your macros, that's going in. So that's where the whole macro thing can fall on its arse. So yes and no. Hey Ricky, how's it going, buddy? Looks like an empty plate is what it looks like. Yeah, it does. Yeah, in reference to the bowl of cereal. Yeah, I challenge you all to do that. Do the 30-gram cereal thing. You'll be horrified. So that in a nutshell is basically how macros work. So if any of you guys were kind of wondering about it and just not sure about the whole way people work this whole thing out, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. It's not nearly as complicated as people make it out to be. So in a nutshell, get your BMR, work out what your basal metabolic rate is, add on your activity levels, that will give your calorie intake. Go onto a macro calculator, put in all your details on your macro calculator. It will give you a split on your macros and your calories, and then you can go from there and then see how it goes, and use one of those macro trackers to see whether or not you're hitting the ballpark or not. So that's my talk today. Not particularly deep, but that's me. But hopefully it's been a little bit helpful, maybe giving you some clues as to how to sort out your diets for yourselves. Tomorrow I'm going to go more into depth in regards to how our body utilises the macros. So you'll get more detail on that tomorrow. And same time as I have been, 5:30 is kind of the go-to time for me. So if you're interested in me waffling again for about half an hour, 45 minutes, then by all means join me, and I will see you tomorrow. So take care, guys. Been nice chatting. See you later.